The morning sun filtered through the tall oak trees lining the suburban street, casting long shadows across the asphalt. It should have been just another quiet day in Fort Pine, Texas, but the tranquility was shattered by the sharp, commanding voice of a man. "Step out of the car. Hands where I can see them." Major Vanessa Caldwell, a decorated officer in the United States Army, sat frozen in her driver's seat. She was wearing her neatly pressed uniform, complete with her name badge and rank insignia. Her hands were placed visibly on the steering wheel, just as she'd been taught. "I don't understand," she said evenly, her voice calm but firm. "What seems to be the problem, officer?" Officer Brad Tanner, his face tight with anger, stood by the driver's side window, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. Tanner had pulled her over minutes earlier, claiming her vehicle matched the description of a stolen car. Vanessa had complied with every instruction, yet here she was, staring down the barrel of a loaded gun that he had just drawn. "Don't talk back to me," Tanner barked, his finger tightening dangerously on the trigger. His blue eyes were filled with something Vanessa recognized instantly: hate. The situation escalated quickly. Vanessa's heart pounded, but she refused to show fear. She was trained for moments like these, but nothing in her years of service had prepared her for this. A civilian officer who clearly didn't see the uniform, only the color of her skin. "Sir, I am unarmed," she said slowly, each word measured and clear. "I am a United States Army officer. Please put the weapon down." I said, "Out of the car." "No," Tanner shouted, his voice cracking as if his authority were slipping through his fingers. Vanessa glanced at the small crowd gathering on the sidewalk. Phones were out, cameras recording. She silently hoped someone had already called for backup. The fear in the eyes of the onlookers mirrored what she refused to show. "Officer, I am asking you to reconsider," Vanessa said, her tone unwavering. "This will not end well for you." For a moment, time seemed to stop. Tanner's gun wavered slightly, and in his hesitation, Vanessa thought she might have gotten through to him. Then, a voice rang out from the crowd, sharp and clear. "Hey, that's Major Caldwell. She's my son's CO. She's a hero, man." The shout cut through the tension like a knife. Tanner's face turned a shade of red that could only be described as fury. His finger twitched, and Vanessa knew she had mere seconds before the situation turned deadly. Suddenly, the piercing wail of a police siren echoed down the street. Backup had arrived. 2 squad cars screeched to a halt, and uniformed officers spilled out, shouting commands. "Tanner, stand down," one of them yelled. But Tanner didn't move. He seemed trapped in his own rage, unable, or unwilling, to lower his weapon. Vanessa, still as a statue, watched as the officers approached Tanner, their guns drawn but aimed at him. And then, everything exploded into chaos. The scene turned into a whirlwind of shouting and chaos as officers surrounded Officer Tanner, urging him to lower his weapon. "Stand down, Tanner!" shouted Lieutenant Gerald Parks, a veteran officer who had been on the force for over 20 years. His voice carried authority, and his eyes locked onto Tanner with the intensity of someone who'd seen too many situations spiral out of control. Tanner's grip on his firearm tightened. "She's resisting," he muttered, his voice trembling. "You don't know what she's capable of." Vanessa remained motionless, her hands still on the steering wheel. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her. Every breath was deliberate, every moment calculated. Lieutenant Parks stepped forward cautiously, his hands raised in a gesture of calm. "Brad, look around. No one here sees a threat except you. She's a major in the Army, for God's sake. Put the gun down." The crowd murmured in agreement, their phones capturing every second. One voice called out, "This isn't right." Another added, "She's done nothing wrong." Tanner glanced around, his face twitching as the reality of the situation began to sink in. He was outnumbered, outflanked, and undeniably in the wrong. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. "Stay back," he barked at Parks, swinging the gun toward him. "You don't know what you're dealing with." At that moment, Vanessa made a decision. She slowly lifted her hands from the steering wheel, keeping them visible as she opened her car door. The sudden movement made Tanner flinch, and the crowd gasped audibly. "Major Caldwell," Parks warned, his voice sharp with concern. "Stay in the car." Vanessa ignored him. She stepped out of the vehicle, standing tall in her uniform. Her presence was commanding, and for a brief moment, the street went silent. "Officer Tanner," she said, her voice steady and firm. "You've made a mistake, but it's not too late to fix it. Put the gun down, and let's resolve this the right way." Tanner's face twisted in confusion, then anger. He shook his head violently, his gun shaking in his hand. "You think you're better than me because you wear that uniform," he spat. "You think I don't know what you people are like?" Vanessa's expression didn't waver. "I think you're scared, officer. And I think you're better than this." The tension was palpable, every second stretching into eternity. Parks edged closer, his hand inching toward his taser. The crowd held their collective breath. Finally, Tanner seemed to break. His gun lowered slightly, and his shoulders sagged. It looked like the nightmare was coming to an end. But just as relief began to ripple through the crowd, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Don't let her fool you, Tanner." It was Officer Derek Gaines, Tanner's partner, who had just arrived on the scene. His tone was just as venomous as Tanner's had been. "They're all the same. You let her off easy, and she'll walk all over you." Tanner's hand twitched, and the gun started to rise again. Vanessa's heart raced. She knew she had only seconds to act before everything fell apart. Time seemed to slow as Tanner's gun began to rise again. The tension in the air was suffocating, and every pair of eyes was locked on the officer whose actions teetered on the edge of disaster. Vanessa took a measured step forward, her hands still visible, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Officer Tanner, this is your chance to stop. You don't want to do this." Parks seized the moment. "Tanner, she's giving you an out. Take it before you destroy everything." Tanner's face was a storm of emotions: confusion, rage, fear. His knuckles turned white around the gun as Gaines stepped closer, whispering venom into his ear. "Don't let them win, Brad. Show them you're in charge," Gaines said, his words dripping with malice. Vanessa saw the flicker of hesitation in Tanner's eyes and knew this was her opening. "Tanner," she said, her voice firm but calm, "look around you. This isn't a war zone, and I'm not your enemy. You've got a badge, not a grudge. Make the right choice. Lower the weapon." The crowd murmured, some pleading for Tanner to stand down while others shouted their anger. The phones stayed up, recording every second. Suddenly, Tanner's hand dropped, the gun pointing toward the ground. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Relief began to settle in, but the moment was short-lived. "Tanner!" Gaines barked, stepping forward. "Don't be weak." In a shocking move, Gaines reached for his own gun. The crowd erupted in chaos, screams piercing the air as people scrambled for safety. Vanessa knew what was about to happen. Acting on instinct, she lunged forward, closing the distance between herself and Tanner. She grabbed his arm and shoved the gun from his grasp, disarming him with a precision that came from years of military training. The weapon clattered to the ground. Parks and another officer moved in, tackling Gaines before he could draw his firearm. The scene dissolved into a blur of movement as Gaines and Tanner were restrained, their faces contorted with rage and disbelief. The crowd erupted in cheers and shouts of relief. "You're a hero, Major Caldwell," someone yelled. Vanessa, breathing heavily, stepped back, her hands shaking from the adrenaline. Tanner, now on his knees with his hands cuffed behind his back, spat at the ground near Vanessa's feet. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You'll see." Vanessa looked at him, her eyes unwavering. "It is over, Officer Tanner. For you." As the two disgraced officers were led away, Vanessa turned to Parks, who gave her a grateful nod. "Major Caldwell," he said, his voice low, "you just saved a lot of lives today. Including theirs." Vanessa glanced at the crowd, now buzzing with activity. People approached her, offering words of thanks and support. Phones were still recording, the footage already circulating online. But Vanessa knew this wasn't just about what happened here today. This was a snapshot of something much bigger, a battle she'd been fighting her whole life, and one that was far from over. How do you think Vanessa handled this intense situation? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let us know what you would have done in her place. The video of the incident spread like wildfire across social media. Headlines buzzed with phrases like "Army Major defuses tense standoff" and "Racist officers exposed in viral video." The footage captured every critical moment: Tanner's drawn gun, Vanessa's calm resolve, and the crowd's chants for justice. Within hours, the incident became a national conversation. Vanessa sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone as messages poured in. Some were from friends and family offering support, while others were from strangers sharing their own stories of discrimination. A few were hateful, accusing her of disrespecting law enforcement and playing the race card. Her commanding officer, Colonel James Preston, had already called. "The Army stands behind you, Major Caldwell," he'd said. "But expect backlash. This is going to get political fast." He wasn't wrong. On the evening news, pundits debated the incident. Some applauded Vanessa's composure and courage, calling her a role model. Others painted a different narrative, focusing on Tanner's claims that he was just doing his job and that the situation was blown out of proportion. Vanessa scrolled through her phone, stopping on a live video. A local protest had formed outside the Fort Pine Police Department. People of all races and ages held signs with messages like "Justice for Caldwell" and "End racial profiling." The chant was deafening. No justice, no peace. Her heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and unease. She wasn't used to being the face of a movement, and she didn't ask for this attention. But she knew this was bigger than her. Meanwhile, inside the police department, things were unraveling quickly. Tanner sat in a small, sterile interrogation room, his head in his hands. His once confident demeanor had crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. "You've put us in a mess," said Chief Howard Riley, slamming a folder onto the table. "The department is being accused of harboring racism, and you're the poster boy." Tanner looked up, his face pale. "I was doing my job." "That woman—" Major Caldwell, Chief Riley interrupted sharply. "A decorated Army officer. And you pointed a gun at her for no reason other than your own bias." "It wasn't like that," Tanner protested. "She looked suspicious. Her car matched." Riley cut him off again. "Stop. The car didn't match anything. We checked. This is on you, and now it's on all of us." In another room, Officer Gaines sat with his union representative, defiant despite the evidence against him. "I'm not apologizing," he said. "This is just woke nonsense trying to ruin good cops." The union rep sighed. "This isn't about being woke. It's about accountability. And you're about to lose everything if you don't take this seriously." Back at her home, Vanessa received a call she didn't expect. "This is Erica Martin with The Atlantic," the voice on the other end said. "We'd like to do a feature on you, on your life, your career, and what happened yesterday. America needs to hear your story." Vanessa hesitated. She wasn't sure if she wanted to share more than she already had. But then she thought of the messages she'd received from people who saw themselves in her. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's talk." The next morning, as Vanessa prepared for her interview, she received another message, this time from an anonymous number. "Be careful, Major Caldwell. You don't know who you're dealing with." The words sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. Vanessa stared at the message on her phone, the words seeming to burn into her mind. "Be careful, Major Caldwell. You don't know who you're dealing with." Her instinct was to dismiss it as a prank, but something about it felt personal, like whoever sent it knew more than they should. She forwarded the message to her commanding officer, Colonel Preston, who immediately responded. "Don't engage. Forward this to the authorities. I'll have our legal team look into it." Despite his calm response, Vanessa couldn't shake the unease that settled over her. This wasn't just about a single incident anymore. It felt like the beginning of something far more sinister. Later that day, Vanessa arrived at the studio for her interview with The Atlantic. The crew greeted her warmly, and Erica Martin, a seasoned journalist with a reputation for tackling hard-hitting stories, guided her to the set. "Major Caldwell," Erica began as the cameras rolled, "you've become the center of a national conversation about racism and accountability. Can you tell us how this experience has affected you personally?" Vanessa took a deep breath. "It's been overwhelming, to say the least. I've faced challenges as a black woman in the military, but this was different. This wasn't just about me. It was about the larger issue of how people of color are perceived and treated in this country." The interview delved into her upbringing, her military career, and the events of that fateful day. Vanessa spoke with a mix of humility and determination, her words resonating with viewers across the country. I want people to understand that this isn't just about one bad officer, she said. It's about a system that allows these biases to persist. We need real change. As the interview wrapped up, Erica leaned in slightly. One last question. Have you received any threats or pushback since the incident? Vanessa hesitated. She thought about the text message, but instinct told her not to reveal too much. I've received mixed reactions, she said carefully. Some support, some criticism. It comes with the territory. After the interview aired, Vanessa's phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages of support flooded in, along with a few more ominous ones. One in particular stood out. You should have kept quiet, Major. Now you've made things worse for yourself. Vanessa forwarded the text to Colonel Preston and the local police, but she knew this wasn't something they could solve easily. Whoever was behind this was determined to intimidate her. Meanwhile, at the Fort Pine Police Department, Chief Riley was facing a storm of his own. Protests outside the station had grown larger, and reporters were demanding answers. Internal Affairs had launched an investigation into Tanner, Gaines, and the department's practices. It's chaos out there, Lieutenant Parks said, gesturing toward the windows where protesters waved signs and chanted. And Tanner's lawyer is making it worse. What now? Riley asked, exasperated. He's claiming Tanner acted in self-defense and that Major Caldwell was hostile and uncooperative. Riley slammed his fist on the desk. There's video evidence. How can they spin this? They're trying, Parks replied grimly. And Gaines? He's doubling down, claiming the whole thing was a setup to smear the department. Riley rubbed his temples. This department's reputation is on the line. If we don't get ahead of this, it's not just their jobs, it's all of ours. Back at home, Vanessa was preparing for another long night of responding to emails and phone calls when she heard a sound outside her house. She froze, her training kicking in as she carefully approached the window. Through the blinds, she saw a dark figure standing near her car. Her heart raced as she reached for her phone to call the police. But before she could dial, the figure moved into the light, revealing a face she recognized. It was Officer Parks. She opened the door cautiously. Lieutenant Parks? What are you doing here? He looked around nervously, his expression tense. I didn't want to call or email. I had to talk to you in person. About what? She asked, her voice steady despite her unease. There's more going on than you realize, he said quietly. Tanner and Gaines? They're just the tip of the iceberg. There are people in the department, powerful people, who don't want this investigation to go any further. You're in danger, Major. Vanessa's stomach dropped. What kind of danger? Before Parks could answer, a car screeched to a halt at the end of the street. Two men in dark clothing stepped out, their faces obscured. Get inside, Parks said urgently. Now. Vanessa barely had time to react before the men started toward them. What's the real story behind the threat to Vanessa? Who are these men, and what are they after? Share your theories in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned as the truth begins to unravel, and the stakes rise even higher. Vanessa's pulse quickened as the two men strode toward her house. Their movements were deliberate, their eyes locked on her and Parks. The street was eerily quiet except for the sound of their footsteps. Inside. Now, Parks urged again, his tone leaving no room for argument. Vanessa stepped back, but her military instincts wouldn't let her retreat entirely. Who are they? She demanded. Trouble, Parks muttered, glancing over his shoulder. He reached for his holstered weapon. Stay behind me. Before Vanessa could respond, one of the men raised his hand, revealing a shiny badge. Lieutenant Parks, Major Caldwell, we're here to talk. Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. Parks didn't lower his weapon. Identify yourselves. The man with the badge smirked. Detective Randall, Internal Affairs. This is my partner, Detective Hayes. We need to have a word with the Major. Privately. Vanessa frowned, her instincts telling her something was off. Internal Affairs doesn't show up unannounced in the middle of the night, she said, crossing her arms. If you're legitimate, you'll have no problem showing your credentials. The detectives exchanged a glance, their smirks fading. Randall sighed, pulling out a leather wallet and flashing his badge briefly. It looked official, but Vanessa couldn't be sure. "We're not here to play games," Hayes said, his voice sharp. "This is a sensitive matter, Major. You've stirred up a lot of attention, and we need to ensure the integrity of our investigation." Parks didn't budge, his gun still trained on them. "Funny. I don't recall hearing about IA sending anyone out tonight. Why don't we call the chief and confirm?" "That won't be necessary," Randall snapped. "Put the gun down, Lieutenant, before you make a mistake." Vanessa stepped forward, her calm demeanor masking the unease churning inside her. "If this is official business, I'm happy to cooperate. But I'll be recording this conversation, and I'll need confirmation from your department first." Randall's face darkened. "This isn't a negotiation, Major. You either come with us now, or we'll escalate." Before the tension could boil over, headlights appeared at the end of the street. Another car pulled up, and a familiar figure stepped out, Chief Riley himself. "What the hell is going on here?" Riley barked as he approached. His eyes darted between Vanessa, Parks, and the supposed internal affairs detectives. "Chief," Randall began, "we're here on official IA business. The Major is a key figure in our investigation, and we need her cooperation." Riley's face hardened. "Funny, because I didn't authorize any IA action tonight. And as far as I know, Major Caldwell isn't under investigation. She's the victim." Randall's composure cracked. He and Hayes exchanged another glance, then Hayes muttered, "Let's go." "You're not going anywhere," Riley snapped. "Not until I verify who you are." As Riley pulled out his phone, the two men turned abruptly and started walking back to their car. Parks stepped forward, his gun still drawn. "Stop right there," he ordered. But Randall and Hayes ignored him, climbing into their vehicle and speeding off. Vanessa stood frozen, watching the taillights disappear into the night. "What was that?" she asked, turning to Riley. Riley's expression was grim. "That wasn't internal affairs. Someone's trying to silence you, Major. And they're willing to break all the rules to do it." The weight of his words settled over Vanessa like a heavy fog. This wasn't just about Tanner or Gaines. There were bigger forces at play, and whoever they weren't afraid to show their hand. Inside the house, Parks and Riley sat down with Vanessa to strategize. "They're testing the waters," Riley said. "They want to see how much pressure you can handle before you back down. But we're not going to let them win." Vanessa nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'm not backing down. Whoever they are, they've messed with the wrong person." Parks leaned forward, his voice low. "We need to figure out who's pulling the strings. This isn't just about a couple of bad cops, it's a system. And we're going to expose it." As they planned their next steps, Vanessa couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was only just beginning. Vanessa barely slept that night. Every creak of her house seemed louder, every shadow a potential threat. The visit from the so-called internal affairs detectives made one thing clear: she was being targeted by a network far more organized and dangerous than she had imagined. By morning, her resolve had crystallized. Sitting at her kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee, she reviewed the notes she'd scribbled during her late-night conversation with Parks and Chief Riley. It wasn't just about defending herself anymore. It was about dismantling the system, protecting people like Tanner and Gaines. Her first step was to follow the trail. She reached out to Erica Martin, the journalist from The Atlantic, and shared what had happened the night before. Erica was alarmed but also intrigued. "This changes everything," Erica said. "If someone's willing to go this far to intimidate you, there's a much bigger story here. Let me make some calls. I'll see what I can dig up." Meanwhile, Parks, true to his word, was already working the angles within the department. Over the next few days, he uncovered disturbing connections. Tanner and Gaines weren't just rogue officers. They were part of a group within the department that had shielded each other for years. This group, unofficially referred to as the Brotherhood, operated with impunity, covering up misconduct and retaliating against anyone who challenged them. Parks met Vanessa at a quiet diner outside of town to share what he'd found. "This goes higher than we thought," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "The Brotherhood has ties to city officials, local businesses, even some state-level politicians. They've got funding, connections, and they're deeply entrenched." Vanessa opened the folder, her stomach tightening as she scanned the documents. There were emails, financial records, and even photos tying members of the group to high-ranking officials. "They've been untouchable for years," Parks continued. But now they're desperate. Your case has brought too much attention, and they're scrambling to shut it down. Vanessa closed the folder and looked at Parks. If we expose this, it's going to get ugly. Parks nodded. Ugly doesn't even begin to cover it. But we have to move fast. They'll try to discredit you, me, and anyone else who gets too close. The two devised a plan to take the information public in a way that couldn't be easily dismissed. Vanessa reached out to Erica again, agreeing to a follow-up interview that would reveal everything they'd uncovered. Parks, meanwhile, worked with Chief Riley to ensure the department wouldn't interfere, at least, not officially. The night before the interview, Vanessa received another message. You think you're safe, but you're not. Walk away while you still can. She stared at the screen, her hands trembling slightly. This was the third threat she'd received, and it was starting to feel personal. She forwarded it to Riley and Parks, then tried to focus on preparing for the interview. The next morning, as the cameras rolled, Vanessa laid everything bare. She spoke not just about her own experience, but about the systemic issues that allowed people like Tanner and Gaines to operate unchecked. She shared Parks' findings, providing the audience with hard evidence of the Brotherhood's existence. I didn't come forward to be a hero, Vanessa said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. I came forward because silence is complicity. And I refused to be complicit. The interview aired that evening, and the response was immediate. Social media exploded with outrage and support. The hashtag Justice for Caldwell began trending nationwide. Protesters swarmed City Hall, demanding accountability not just for Tanner and Gaines, but for every official connected to the Brotherhood. But as Vanessa watched the coverage from her living room, a sinking feeling settled over her. She knew this was far from over. And she was right. A loud crash shattered the quiet of the evening. Vanessa jumped to her feet, her heart pounding. She ran to the front door and froze. Her car was engulfed in flames, the fire roaring like a beast unleashed. The sight confirmed what she already knew. Her enemies were done with subtle threats. They were coming for her. The flames consuming Vanessa's car illuminated the dark street, casting eerie shadows on the houses around her. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, some brave enough to step outside with their phones to record the chaos. Sirens wailed in the distance, a response to the emergency call Vanessa made moments earlier. Standing in her driveway, Vanessa clenched her fists, her mind racing. The fire wasn't just an attack, it was a declaration. The Brotherhood wasn't backing down. But neither was she. When the fire department arrived, they quickly extinguished the blaze, but the damage was done. Vanessa's car was reduced to charred metal. As the firefighters packed up, Lieutenant Parks pulled up in an unmarked car. His face was tense, his eyes scanning the area. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low. Vanessa nodded. "Physically, yes. But this is escalating, Parks. They're getting bolder." "I know," he said grimly. "And it's about to come to a head." Parks had spent the day gathering more intel on the Brotherhood. His latest discovery revealed a meeting scheduled for that very night at a remote warehouse on the outskirts of town. Several high-ranking members of the group were expected to attend, including Tanner and Gaines. "This is our chance," Parks said. "If we catch them red-handed, there's no way they can spin this." Vanessa hesitated. "You're talking about confronting them directly? That's dangerous, Parks." "We don't have a choice," he said. "They're targeting you now. We either take them down tonight or risk them coming after you again. Next time, it could be worse." Vanessa agreed, knowing he was right. The two devised a plan. Parks would go in undercover with a wire while Vanessa coordinated with Chief Riley to ensure backup was ready. Later that night, Parks arrived at the warehouse, dressed in plain clothes and armed with nothing but a hidden recording device. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. About a dozen men sat around a long table, their faces illuminated by a single overhead light. Tanner and Gaines sat near the head, their expressions smug and confident. "This Caldwell mess is spiraling out of control," one of the men said. "The protests, the media, it's a nightmare." "Relax," Tanner said, leaning back in his chair. "We've handled worse. She'll fold soon enough." "And if she doesn't?" another man asked. "Then we make her," Gaines replied coldly. "She's not untouchable. We just need to send a clearer message." Parks listened intently, his heart pounding. He knew the backup team was positioned nearby, ready to move in on his signal. But before he could activate the wire, something unexpected happened. The warehouse door slammed open, and Vanessa stepped inside, flanked by Chief Riley and a team of officers. The room erupted into chaos. Several members of the Brotherhood bolted for the exits, only to be met by officers waiting outside. Tanner and Gaines stood frozen, their faces a mixture of shock and rage. "You're done," Vanessa said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Every word you just said is on tape. There's no escaping this." Riley stepped forward, cuffs in hand. "Brad Tanner, Derek Gaines, you're under arrest. And trust me, the charges are going to stick." As the officers rounded up the group, Tanner turned to Vanessa, his face contorted with anger. "You think you've won? This isn't over. People like me don't go down without a fight." Vanessa stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "You've already lost. The difference now is everyone sees it." The arrests made headlines the next morning. News outlets reported on the takedown of the Brotherhood, and Vanessa was hailed as a hero. The public outcry led to sweeping reforms within the Fort Pine Police Department, with multiple officials resigning or being removed from their positions. Vanessa's life slowly returned to normal, though the scars of the ordeal remained. She knew the fight against systemic racism wasn't over, but this victory was a step in the right direction. Sitting in her living room a few weeks later, Vanessa received an email from a young woman she didn't know. "Major Caldwell, thank you for standing up for all of us. Your courage gives me hope. I want to be like you someday." Vanessa smiled, her resolve stronger than ever. This wasn't just her fight, it was a fight for everyone who had been silenced or oppressed. And she was ready for whatever came next. What did you think of the conclusion? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to spread Vanessa's inspiring story. Stay tuned for more compelling stories like this one.